All right, today we're jumping into the history of the United States, but we're going to look at it through a really interesting lens, conflict. Because when you peel back the layers, you see that America's story, right from the very start, has been forged in the fire of struggle.
So let me ask you this. What really makes a nation? Is it all about shared ideals, big, lofty ideas? Or is it something grittier? Is a nation hammered into shape by the struggles it shares? As we're about to see, the story of the U.S. really points to conflict as the engine, the driving force of its transformation, at pretty much every turn.
So here's the plan. We're going to hit 5 key moments: the birth of the nation, the Civil War, its rise to a superpower, the internal battles during the Cold War, and then bring it all home with the challenges of this century.
All right, let's dive right in. Section 1, the birth of a nation. This is the story of how 13 little colonies decided to take on the mightiest empire on the planet. So what was this fight really all about? I mean, at its core, it was pretty simple. You had these 13 colonies, right? They were doing well, they were prosperous, and they were used to governing themselves. Then, all of a sudden, the British Parliament, an ocean away, starts slapping new taxes on them. And the colonists, well, they fired back with a phrase that has echoed through history: no taxation without representation. Their whole point was, hey, you can't tax us if we don't have a voice in your government. It's just not right.
But this went way deeper than just money. It was fueled by this really revolutionary idea called republicanism. And you have to understand just how radical this was back then. I mean, we're talking about a world run by kings, by hereditary monarchs. And here come these American rebels saying, no, 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 sovereign power, that belongs to the people. It was an idea that was about to turn the entire world on its head.
And this right here, this is the poetry of the revolution. This famous line from the Declaration of Independence, it's so much more than just a breakup letter with King George. It was a mission statement, a declaration to the world about what this new nation was supposed to be about: equality, unalienable rights. These were the founding ideals. Of course, it would take centuries of struggle to even begin to apply them to everyone. But this is where it all started.
So how did it all shake out? Well, after a long, brutal war, and let's be honest, they couldn't have done it without a ton of help from the French, the colonies actually won. And the result? The United States of America. Governed by a brand new constitution, this incredible document designed to pull off a tricky balancing act, creating a government strong enough to work, but limited enough to protect people's freedom. But that new union, it wasn't on solid ground for long. It was about to face its greatest test yet, which brings us to Section 2, a nation divided, and how it came dangerously close to destroying itself from within.
Okay, so picture this. It's the early 1800s, and the U.S. is just exploding westward. This idea of manifest destiny takes hold, this belief that it's their God-given right to control the whole continent. But as the nation grew, a deep, poisonous contradiction grew right along with it. And with every single new piece of land, one question hung over everything. Will this be a free state or a slave state?
And by the middle of the century, it was painfully clear that there weren't one, but 2 Americas living side by side. You had the North, which was all about industrialization, factories, railroads, and free labor. Then you had the South, an agrarian society, a farm-based economy that was completely and utterly dependent on the forced labor of millions of enslaved people to produce cotton. I mean, these weren't just small economic disagreements. We're talking about 2 fundamentally different civilizations with totally opposite values.
The 1850s, man, that was basically just one long 10-year countdown to disaster. Every attempt to compromise just made things worse. You had things like the Fugitive Slave Act, which infuriated the North. You had literal violence breaking out in bleeding Kansas over the issue. The nation was a powder keg. And the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, well, that was the match. 11 southern states seceded, and the Civil War began.
And the cost? It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. Just look at this number, 8%. 8% of all white American men of fighting age died in this war. And in the South, it was a staggering 18%. Think about that, almost 1 in 5. This was, and still is, the deadliest war in American history, by far.
So what was the result of all this bloodshed? Well, it answered the 2 biggest questions that had haunted the nation since its founding. First, the Union was preserved. The country would not break apart. And second, slavery was abolished. The nation was, in a very real sense, reborn. But it came at a devastating price. And the scars, those would last for a very, very long time.
Okay, So, with the nation reunited, albeit scarred, its next great transformation was about to begin, this time on the world stage. That brings us to Section 3, how America's industrial power rocketed it to superpower status and how that status got tested in two brutal world wars.
The years after the Civil War were just an explosion of economic growth. I mean, it was incredible. You had a perfect storm of vast natural resources, amazing innovation, and millions of immigrants providing the labor. And the results? Industrial output just went through the roof. By the turn of the century, 1900, the United States wasn't just a power, it was the world's leading industrial power.
And it wasn't long before that new industrial muscle was put to the test. What's so interesting is that if you look at World War I and World War II, the U.S. followed almost the exact same playbook. Step 1, stay out of it, declare neutrality. Step 2, become the arsenal of democracy, bankrolling and arming the Allies. Step 3, get pulled in directly after being attacked. And the crazy part? After each war, the U.S. came out even stronger and more dominant on the world stage.
Now, the time between those two wars, it was a period of incredible whiplash. First, you had the Roaring '20s, a wild decade of jazz, prosperity, and massive cultural shifts. But then, damn, it all came crashing down in 1929. The Great Depression hit, and it was the worst economic disaster in modern history. It left a mark on the American psyche, on its politics, that would last for decades to come.
Okay, so let's jump ahead to the post-war world. And this brings us to a really fascinating paradox. In Section 4, we're going to look at how America was fighting this massive global war against communism on the outside, while at the very same time it was fighting a deep, profound battle for its own soul on the inside.
The big one, the external struggle, was of course the Cold War. For more than 40 years, the entire globe held its breath as the US and the Soviet Union stood toe-to-toe. It was this massive ideological showdown, right? Capitalism versus communism. And while they never fought directly, they fought in every other way imaginable. Terrifying nuclear arms races, a glamorous space race to the moon, and absolutely brutal proxy wars that cost millions of lives in places like Korea and Vietnam.
But while all of that was happening on the world stage, an equally momentous war was being fought right at home. The civil rights movement was waging its own campaign, a largely nonviolent one, against a century of racial segregation and injustice. They were holding up a mirror to the nation and demanding that it finally live up to those words written all the way back in 1776, "All men are created equal."
And this was just an era of incredible social upheaval. The civil rights movement didn't happen in a vacuum. It lit a fire. It inspired a powerful women's movement that fought for equality in the workplace and at home. You had this huge youth-driven counterculture that was questioning everything: the government, the Vietnam War, their parents' values. It was a true revolution of rights happening all at once.
And that whole revolution of rights helped push the U.S. into the modern era. Which brings us to our last stop, the new and different conflicts of the 21st century. Because when the Cold War ended, the whole nature of conflict, it changed completely.
For a brief moment after the Soviet Union fell, the U.S. was the undisputed, sole superpower in the world. But that moment didn't last long. The 9/11 attacks changed everything, launching the global war on terror. This was a totally new kind of fight against an enemy that wasn't a country. And on top of that, the nation got rocked by huge economic crises, like the financial meltdown of 2008, which created a whole new set of internal conflicts. So when you step back and look at the big picture, it's pretty clear, right? From the very beginning all the way to today, the story of the United States is a story of conflict. External wars, internal struggles, it's all there. And that really leaves us with one big question to think about. For a nation that was literally forged in the fire of conflict, how is this long, complicated, and often painful legacy going to shape its path forward?